Our scripture this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew. And Jesus is continuing his journey and his discussion as he is in Jerusalem and as he's nearing his time when he will be arrested. Jesus says, "At that time the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps but did not take any oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight the cry rang out, 'Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him.' Then all of the virgins woke up and trimmed their lamps. The foolish one said to the wise, 'Give us some of your oil. Our lamps are going out.' 'No,' they replied, 'there may not be enough for both of us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves.' But while they were on their way to buy the oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later the others also came. 'Lord, Lord,' they said, 'open the door for us.' But he replied, 'Truly I tell you, I don't know you. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour.'" The word of God for the people of God. May the Spirit add a blessing to our understanding of it. So what exactly is going on in this parable? Some of you maybe watch television and you've heard of the show The Bachelor. You don't have to admit that maybe you've watched it. You surely don't have to admit that maybe you liked watching the show. But it's a story of a bachelor and then a bunch of ladies they compete for his hand in marriage. And I think of all the episodes, they've all ended with happy marriages, long marriages. I think one. I don't even know the statistic. It's been on for a long time. But what is happening in this parable? It sounds like maybe it's the first episode of The Bachelor from about 2,000 years ago. We've got a wedding party that's going to happen. And in tradition, the groom would come and there'd be a bunch of bridesmaids waiting to meet him. And one commentator said it was kind of a way to meet eligible bachelors in the community. The wedding party would come. And that would be a chance to meet some men who are well off enough in the community to take care of it. And of course, Jesus uses this story to tell us a little bit about the kingdom of heaven. He's trying to say what heaven will be like. But it's an odd story, if you think about it. I mean, beyond the whole fact there are 10 waiting, and they're waiting so long that the oil burns out of their lamps, and finally he shows up at midnight, and they say, "Go buy some oil at midnight." Sure, because vendors are always open in the middle of the night when you go buy stuff. But there's a lot going on in this parable. It's in the middle of Matthew when Jesus is kind of doing the little apocalypse, where he's talking a lot about the end times, and what it's like. What it's going to be like when the end comes and we all live in the New Jerusalem and the New Earth. So Jesus tells them, because the kingdom of heaven is going to be like this. There are 10 bridesmaids who prepared to meet the groom. 5 of them bring some extra oil, just in case they're prepared. 5 of them don't. The groom is delayed for whatever reason. Finally he comes in the middle of the night, and the 5 with extra oil light their lamps, ready to go meet him. And the 5 that didn't bring it ask, share, it'd be nice. And they say, "No, go buy your own." And at the end, when the 5 foolish ones come to be let into the party, the groom says, "Nope, I don't know who you are," and keeps them in the dark. Now, one way we can look at that parable and say, yeah, that's right. Those 5 are prepared. They saved, they brought extra, they should get rewarded for their prudence, right? They took care of themselves. Those other 5 that didn't think ahead, that's kind of what you get, right? If you don't pay attention. But it does not fit with a lot of what Jesus said in the Gospels, especially what Jesus said in Matthew. It doesn't fit when Jesus says about don't judge others with that splinter in your eye. It doesn't fit when Jesus says if you knock, I will open the door. It doesn't fit when Jesus says you don't forgive 7 times, you forget 70 times 7. It doesn't fit with Jesus blessing the loaves and the fishes and feeding everyone until they were full and having all kinds of leftovers. It doesn't fit with Jesus blessing the children. It doesn't fit for Jesus' parable about looking for the lost sheep or the lost coin. It doesn't even fit with another parable where the vineyards work for all day, half day, and 2 hours and all get the same pay. Because Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is like that. It's almost like that Sesame Street saying, well, one of these is not like the other. I mean, you would expect the parable to say they shared, they all had enough, or you would at least expect that the groom would open the door when they knocked. But Jesus says, no, you're not getting in. Now, it'd be easy just to write this off as maybe a one-off parable where Jesus is making some kind of abstract statement. But we forget about the talk about the narrow gate, the weeping and the grinding of teeth, the parable of the weeds and the wheat, or the parable we talked about where that one who was improperly dressed for the wedding party was tossed out in the street. Jesus said those things about the kingdom of heaven in Matthew 2. He talks a lot about grace and forgiveness, but he also talks about missing the boat, if you will. He talks about not making it into the kingdom, being left out of the party. We don't always talk a lot about that. We don't talk a lot about those or these parables where Jesus seems to be excluding people. Before we dive in too much, I got to say something. When we talk about these parables where Jesus seems to say some won't make it, who is the judge on that? Who decides who's in or out? Jesus? Jesus decides who's in and who's left out. We are not the ones to deem who is worthy. We don't get to decide who gets to come into heaven. We don't get to decide who's worthy of receiving the message of discipleship and grace. Our job as disciples is to share it with everyone. That doesn't mean we share it with those who act like us or look like us. Doesn't even mean we share it with those who have to follow a certain set of rules we think need to be. Our job is to share the grace and forgiveness. Let Jesus worry about who may be in or who may be out. When we hear parables like this, we need to know that Jesus is talking to us. Jesus is reminding us that it's easy to get pretty comfortable. And that's no way to be a disciple. It's to comfortably skate through life. Because when Jesus is talking about the oil and the church and the lamp, he's not talking about a wedding party, obviously. He's not even talking about sharing oil that you can buy, that you can share, that you can loan. He's talking about a spiritual fuel, if you will. Like you can go to school and you can forget to study for a test and you can copy your friend's math homework, right? Or copy this test off your friend at school. You might pass that test, but when the surprise quiz comes next and you haven't shared, what you can't copy is your friend's knowledge of math, right? Or English or whatever study it may be. You can't share that kind of knowledge. Just like you can't share that spiritual reserve that those 10 or those 5 bridesmaids had. Like I talked in the children's room, it's important that we fuel up, if you will. That we build our reserves. Because eventually they're going to run out. Dark times, tough times are going to come into all of our lives. And we're going to need to rely on those promises of God. We're going to want that peace that surpasses all understanding when we get those times of our lives where we are faced with disappointments and failures. When we're devastated by grief. We'll need hope urgently when our child is sick or our parent is helpless. We'll need peace when we realize there may not be enough money to pay the bills at the end of the month. We'll need love and grace when we realize maybe a relationship won't last. We'll need joy when we feel that grief and loss may be never ending. So what do we do when we run out of fuel? I know I have run out of fuel. Your kid walks in at 6 o'clock and says, "What's for dinner?" And you say, "Meatloaf." And they say, "Meatloaf again?" And you're charged into, it's instantly turned into Godzilla, right? And say, you'll eat what I put in front of you, or you'll go to bed hungry. Or you've had the same conversation over and over again with a friend. They just don't seem to get the advice that you're giving them. Or you've come to the end of the month and money's not there again. Or it's a health scare. And you realize, uh-oh. But you're out of oil. Your tank is empty. You've run out of gas. Like when you haven't had a conversation with your spouse in 3 weeks that doesn't revolve around the carpool, you're going to run out of oil. If you work 80-hour weeks for longer than you can remember, your relationships are going to suffer. You're going to run out of oil. If you've eaten junk food for your entire life, eventually it's going to catch up with you. This kind of oil, this kind of spiritual fuel, you can't borrow from someone else. You can't say, share me some of your faith. You can't borrow someone else's peace of mind. You can't borrow someone else's passion for God. You can't borrow someone else's peace. You can't say, you seem to be getting along well. Give me some of that peace, some of that hope. It doesn't work that way. You have to find it yourself. You have to fill up with it yourself. And that's what Jesus is telling us in that parable. It's not that the bridesmaids didn't want to share. It's that they couldn't share. And Jesus is telling us that eventually time is going to run out. The hour is going to get late, and everyone gets sleepy. We all doze and we all put it off. Right? One of these days, I'll quit working so hard and I'll put more quality time in with my kids. One of these days, I'm going to take up painting. I'm going to take up woodworking. I'm going to take up writing. I'm going to take up some hobby. I've always wanted to do it. One of these days, I'm going to stop writing checks and really get involved down at the shelter. I'm really going to get involved in helping the poor and less fortunate. I'm going to find something to do at church. One of these days when I can find time. We all put it off. But eventually, the shout goes up, here he is, he's coming. And we're going to realize we didn't bring our flask of oil. We didn't fill our reserves. The time will come when we're going to have to draw on our spiritual reserves, on our oil, if you will. Right here. And we're not going to have that reserve if we haven't taken the time to fill it. You can't take the reserve from your pension savings. You can't take the reserves from your good intentions or your long-range plans. Your reserves come from what fuels you right now. It's going to come from where you are with God right now. So how do we fill our lamp? How do we fill our own spiritual reserves? Obviously, it starts with Sunday morning. If it ends with Sunday morning, you're not filling your reserves. It continues with daily prayer and Bible reading. How much time do you truly give to God? It continues with helping others. Jesus tells us, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was naked and you clothed me. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was in prison and you visited me. I was sick and you comforted me. That's where we find Jesus. That's also where we continue to fill our tanks. Helping others. That's where we get filled up. But all these things we can't check out of a library. We can't borrow from a neighbor next door. They're things that we have to do now. The things we have to do ourselves. The last thing is, your lamp is only filled with joy. If you do these three things out of obligation, you're not filling your lamp. You're checking off a checklist. To truly fill your lamp, you have to be joyful in wanting to do it. Certainly there are days when it's easier to sleep in or easier not to go and help. But that's where the filling continues. When we make a choice daily to do it, even though we may not feel like doing it. The truth is, The tough times will come. And what comes out of us is what we put into ourselves. If it's bitterness, if it's anger, if it's hurry, if it's all of that frustration, that's what's going to come out when we're squeezed by the tough times. But if we're filled with joy, if we're filled with faith, if we're filled with putting our time in getting to know God better, then when we're squeezed, that's what comes out. Rachel Eikenberry shared on Facebook the other day a post that fits in perfectly with this. It's an analogy from someone called Brittany Rose. But it says, you are holding a cup of coffee when someone comes along and bumps into you or shakes your arm, making you spill your coffee everywhere. Why did you spill the coffee? Well, because someone bumped into me, of course. Wrong answer. You spilled the coffee because there was coffee in your cup. Had there been tea in the cup, you would have spilled tea. Whatever is inside the cup is what will spill out. Therefore, when life comes along and shakes you, which will happen, whatever is inside you will come out. It's easy to fake it until you get rattled. So we have to ask ourselves, what's in my cup? When life gets tough, what spills over? Joy, gratefulness, peace, and humility? Or anger, bitterness, and harsh words and reactions? You choose what's in your cup. That's how and why we fill our spiritual tanks. Because when we need to rely on them, we're not going to know when it is. We can put it off and put it off because we've got all kinds of time in the world until we don't have all kinds of time in the world. And then quickly we're going to want to withdraw on our reserves. We're going to get squeezed at what's going to come out of us. What we put time into it. I hope we're putting the right things in that will fill our tanks, that will cause us to be respond with faith, and will help us through those situations. Let's fill our tanks with God and Jesus.